everybody. What we have before me is a small thicket of wild sour cherry root sucker plants, which as a group are between 1 and 4 year old, and I'm cultivating those, or maybe it's more precise to say that I'm managing them in a way that I use them to pick fruit, of course, but also I use them as wood chip mulching material, and most importantly, I use the stems as garden stakes, usually for tomatoes, but also cucumbers, and trellises for the peas and beans, and so on. You can see up here some of the fruit I left on the tree. We didn't pick those, and they dried on the branches. Some here as well, but just a couple of fruit here and there. So after the fruiting is fully done and we have picked all that we need, it's a good time to harvest the plants. In effect, what I do is a coppice culture. This is a coppice stand where I cut on a 3 or 4 year rotation the oldest stems, and I select a group of other new growth to form the next generation, which will be coppiced. So here you can see we have 1 year old which got a bit damaged here, but this won't bother the plant. 2 year old stems, and those are 3 year. Those are a good thickness, and I'll be using those for the tomato stakes. I have here another one which is maybe 4 years old, and you can see that about 170 centimeters from the ground I removed the growing tip so it can start branching out, as opposed to, for example, this one, where I removed all the side branches up to a certain height and then left a few so they can fruit. The leftover fruit can be seen. So now I can have at least 2 meters and maybe 20 centimeters pole when I cut it here. And I'll be using the thinnest branches in the compost, and the thicker I'll be throwing in the small wood chipper we have. The way that I do this procedure is very simple. I use just 2 simple tools. The cheapest loppers, I think they're called in English. We call them branch scissors. Those are from Lidl, so it's very cheap. And the other one is a Brazilian machete, which is also very cheap, from Tramontina. What I do is, using the loppers, I do a cut diagonally here at about maybe 15 centimeters from the soil, so it's easier to do the cut. And when you cut diagonally, the pole is already sharpened, so with the pointy tip it's easier to drive into the soil, into the garden. And then I remove the rest of the stem by doing a horizontal cut as close to the ground as possible. And then, using the machete, I quickly remove the side branches, and I'll try to show that to you now. This is the stem which I'll be harvesting. I think that it's a 3-year-old, but it could be 4. I generally don't mark them in any way to know for certain their age, but I observe and coppice them when they reach a certain thickness, because the thinner ones, such as those, they don't offer enough support and they rot much faster in the garden. So first I make the 45 degrees diagonal cut like this, and then I remove the rest of the stem. So this will go to the firewood pile, and this one I'll process right now. This is the coppiced wild sour cherry. So now, just using the machete, just quickly snip the side branches here, so it will be easier to use in the garden. It's a bit difficult to do that with one hand while holding the phone, but I think that you get the idea. And when I'm done removing all the side branches here, you can use the machete in both directions. I select a point near the tip where the stem becomes too thin to be usable, so I just chop it there. Like that, and it's almost done. Just a couple more. Of course, I can remove all the leaves as well, but this is a very nice 2-meter plus long, almost straight garden pole, which also gave us a few handfuls of sour cherry this year. And from that point, this root will regrow next year. You can see that the same root here grew those stems which I left, and they will be coppiced next year. By doing this, I'm also thinning the whole stand, and in this process I also remove some of the plants which are too close to one another or are not growing straight enough. Like this one, this is already bent sideways. And also I'm allowing new root suckers, such as those and those here and further down, to grow, because I want to continue this stand downwards, and in a few years maybe reach down to the other microforest. So I'll be removing most of the thick stems today here. I'll be leaving maybe a couple of those which I selected for production, because we want to have a lower and smaller in size sour cherry tree in the garden, because the big ones are not always easy to pick. Just as a side note, I wanted to show you neighbors' pullets which I think that one actually is a cockerel, and maybe that one as well. But I took apart the last bin of the compost of our compost system, and of course they immediately came over from the neighbors and started scratching, so they'll help me with the compost, and I'll start seeding it maybe tomorrow. In the same time, we have already started using the second bin, and the third bin is now capped with the layer of wood chips, which I fine wood mulch, which I made yesterday with some of the trimmings and some straw and branches, and I put some plastic on top of it because otherwise those hens, baby hens, they come in and scratch you over. And now they have something more interesting to do. Oh, and another thing, this slightly twisted stem here is another pole which I got of coppice black locust. Many people I know, including on YouTube, claim that black locust is invasive and it's not a good tree to grow, and it's hard to manage because of its nasty thorns. But as you can see here, a freshly cut black locust is very easy to peel when you do that in season, and you are left with very smooth bark with no thorns whatsoever. Those tiny pieces here are leftovers from side branches, which I forgot to remove, and if they're removed when they're still small and not woody, you won't be getting any side growth, and you just get this smooth wood, which is the best for garden stakes because it rots very slowly. It's very twisted at the top because it grew as an understory of some of the mulberries, but still very usable, so I'll be keeping that as well. Another small detail I wanted to explain is that you can grow coppice stands, I mean in the context of a small home garden, with very high density. Usually coppices are managed with a machine, so industrially they need like a couple of meters spacing and a ton of other space requirements. But you can see here I have one which I cut 2, 3, 4, 5 growing out of the same root, same stool, and this is not a problem for the plants. They grow tall and healthy, but there is one thing that you must do throughout the season, and this is removing the side branches. I have already done so on those stems, but you can do that throughout the growing season, in spring, in winter, anytime you have the opportunity to do so. The idea here is that removing side branches promotes upwards growth, and also makes the stems straighter and they grow taller quicker. So I usually remove all side branches up to about my head height, so I can pass under them, and at this height I sometimes allow them to branch out so they can fruit. And for example, this one already fruited this year. Here are some of the sour cherries. So there's no problem to have them growing in really tight formations. Like here I have those two growing less than a centimeter apart, but they are all from the same root, of course. But this is not a problem because I'll be just removing the side branches now, which I usually do while I'm working on the coppice. All the other thicker ones here, older, I have done that with them before, so they grow straighter. This one is very curved at the bottom, so I'll be removing it completely. And you can see that now with their branches off, those two stems that does not look crowded at all. This side branch here must be removed as well. So this older stem will get a trim as well. And I'll just quickly snip those. And sometimes when I'm really short on time, I just come in with the machete and fell the branches just by sliding the blade like this quickly. And sometimes it does damage the bark, but as those plants are destined for coppicing anyway, let me see if I can find. So this is the defect that it sometimes occurs. There was a branch here, I snipped it off and peeled some of the bark, and the wound grew over. So this won't be a problem for the use they're intended. Of course, this is not at all recommended for your regular fruit trees. That's the end result of about half an hour of coppicing. 10 poles, one of them from the black locust, but you can see that they vary in width and a bit in length, but that's not a real problem. And also the coppice stand is now thinned out. I have just a little bit of work more to do here to remove some of the side branches, but it's mostly done. And this pile and another one which I made will be put through our small electric wood chipper, which will produce the best mulch for perennial fruit bushes and trees, which is the Ramio wood chips. It's a mix of more green and less brown material. In other words, less carbonations and more nitrogen rich material, which is usually obtained by chipping 1 to 3 year old wood, because if you chip thicker branches, the proportion of the green part in relation to the brown ones is skewed much more towards the brown. So this will be great late summer feed for our fruit trees. That's all for now, and I'll see you in the next one.